Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. The quote-unquote Republican mayor of Fort Worth has decided to celebrate the sexualization of Texas children. The Texas Senate is moving to the right as dominoes fall leading up to the election coming up next year. Chairman Drew Darby is very upset at all the conservatives that were elected in the last election cycle, and those same conservatives continue to push to advance conservative policy even after the session. Let's get to the show. The Fort Worth Report, a left-of-center news outlet, was so proud of Mayor Maddie Parker, the mayor of Fort Worth, when she lit up City Hall in rainbow colors at the end of June for LGBTQ Pride Month. Rainbow colors lighting up City Hall. This is a quote-unquote Republican. This is a alleged Republican mayor. And I've heard her described as the Republican mayor of it's the largest city in Texas represented by a Republican mayor. These are not the actions taken by a Republican mayor. Let me be very clear. Pride Month is a month of the year where ugly, dark, and false things are celebrated. They're lifted high. Children are brought to celebrations where people, mostly naked, do things of a prurient nature. They do things that are designed to cause sex to go from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. And they do it in front of children. That is what Pride Month still is. It is a radical time of some of the most wounded people in our society, people living in some of the darkest places in all of society, come out and parade their darkness. And Mayor Maddie Parker has decided, you know what? This is great. I'm going to have rainbow colors all over City Hall to celebrate this dark and false period of time. Republicans around the country have opposed Pride Month, rightfully so. And it should be that if Republicans have a mayor in a large city, that's the one large city in America that doesn't celebrate Pride Month. You know what's awesome? Down the street from Mayor Maddie Parker's Fort Worth City Hall is the Texas Rangers. And they're the only baseball team in America that doesn't put rainbow flags on their hats and their jerseys during Pride Month. That is what America's baseball team looks like. And if Mayor Maddie Parker was willing to be America's mayor, she would not do this. If you're a Republican official, leader, Republican leader in the state of Texas, in Tarrant County, you should be calling her out. She should feel massive pressure from Republicans for the vile things that she is celebrating. Now, on a more positive note, it looks very, very, very likely that the Texas Senate is going to move further to the right by the end of this election cycle. And I'm going to break down different races that are occurring as different dominoes fall and explain to you why this is good. One thing to remember is that the legislature tends to govern with the most recent election in mind. I've told several people this over the last couple of weeks. The legislature tends to govern with the most recent election in mind. A negative version of this would be 2019, when Beto O'Rourke came 2 points away from defeating Ted Cruz in 2018. Republicans tapped the brakes. This was Dennis Bonin's one session. And Republicans across the board said, we don't really want to pass a lot of Republican policy. Let's just tap the brakes on everything. We don't need to protect the unborn. We don't need to protect the Second Amendment. We don't really need to do any of this stuff. And as a result, the Republican grassroots really pushed hard against the entire legislature, Senate and House. But it was that most recent election that kind of caused everybody collectively to tap the brakes. Now, one of the benefits of this session, and if you go back and listen to my good, bad, and ugly of the session. If you listen to the good and we talk about all the good stuff that happened, one of the reasons that happened is because there were 3 different elections leading up to the session, and all of them got better for conservatives. In March, conservatives won open seats. They replaced outgoing individuals with more conservative replacements. They defeated a number of incumbents. In the May election, we also had more conservative candidates win open seats. We defeated even more incumbents, topping up at 17 Republican incumbents that got defeated. The Republican convention that happened a couple weeks before that also was a conservative victory with the election of Abraham George and Dorinda Randall as the chair and vice chair of the party, where more moderate forces came in and worked very hard to try to elect Dana Myers as our chair. So then you fast forward to the November election, and we expand our majority further, flipping a Democrat state Senate seat to Republican and flipping 2 Democrat state House seats to Republicans. So with those elections in mind, the legislature knows we have to deliver more conservative policies, and they did work to do that. Now, I also have the bad and the ugly of the session, which you can go through about property taxes and then about a lot of conservative policy that made it to the 5 or 10 or 20 yard line and then were killed by various different individual Republican legislators, right? So those are the missed opportunities. There's a lot of missed opportunities, and that's why we need to continue to push. The most important thing going into next session is that when we go into next session, people believe that the legislature has moved to the right. In the event that the Texas House or Texas Senate drift back to the middle in any way, it makes conservative policy harder to enact. So I want you to keep that in mind as we now walk to the different dominoes and walk into a conversation about the different dominoes that are falling in the Texas Senate. Some of y'all know that Senator Maize Middleton is running for Attorney General. He's running against Senator Joan Huffman. The difference being that Maize Middleton does not have what's called a free shot. He has to run for Attorney General and not run for re-election. Joan Huffman is not up for re-election this time. So Senator Joan Huffman can run for Attorney General and not have to give up her seat. And if she loses, she will still come back and be a senator. And then you also have Aaron Reitz, who's running for Attorney General. So 3 individuals running for Attorney General right now: Aaron Reitz, Maize Middleton, and Senator Joan Huffman. What that has caused is Maize Middleton's seat to be vacated. Now, Maize Middleton in the Senate has been a consistent conservative vote, one of the most conservative votes. In fact, Rice University's index ranks him as the 2nd most conservative senator under Brian Hughes. And so naturally, making sure that he's replaced by somebody who will be a consistent Republican vote is important. When he vacated his seat, there were a lot of more moderate individuals that were trying to line up support to run for the Senate. And I won't name names because it's not helpful right now, but there were a number of individuals, all of whom, if they were to replace Maize Middleton, would have then moved that seat from being one of the more conservative members, let's say in the top 5 or, let's say the top 5, 6, or 7 senators, to the bottom 5, 6, or 7. And that kind of shifts the caucus back to the middle. So Dennis Paul came out, and Dennis Paul was an early supporter of reforming the Texas House. He has always been a consistent vote, for the most part, behind a lot of conservative policy. And so Dennis Paul came out, and that is an individual who at least gives Republicans confidence, will ensure that this Senate district remains in the hands of somebody who will consistently support a Republican conservative policy agenda. So Dennis Paul right now is unopposed, which is really good news. Means conservatives don't have to spend a lot of money against some very moderate person that's backed by like Sands Casinos or something else. And we will see what they decide to do. Ultimately, they have time to try to find someone else to run. But in the event that Dennis Paul is the replacement, from outside looking in, if you and me look at the Senate, we go, okay, you replace somebody who's going to consistently back Republican policy with somebody who's consistently going to back conservative Republican policy. It doesn't move the Senate to the right, but it doesn't move it back. We then shift to somebody like Senator Bob Hall, who is a longtime senator at this point. I ran his campaign when he got elected back in 2014. He defeated Bob Dole in the runoff election. I love Senator Bob Hall, his wife Kay. He's been a leading conservative voice in the Senate, has pushed a lot of conservative policy through the process, and is a grassroots warrior. I always say this, but he's one of the few senators that will just hang out on the floor of the convention and be there with his Texas shirt voting and whipping votes for legislative priorities and to make sure the platform stays conservative. He's somebody who is truly grassroots to his core. He just recently announced that he's running for re-election. If somebody like Senator Bob Hall were to not run for re-election, then there would be a chance that that Senate district moves back to the middle. So the right people running for re-election ends up being really important as well. We then shift to some retirements that were just announced, and I want you to understand the significance of these retirements. So the first one that came out was Senator Robert Nichols. Now, Senator Robert Nichols is the most liberal senator in the Texas Senate, and it's not even close. If you're watching the video, you'll be able to see the Senate rankings from Rice University, and you can look down and see Senator Robert Nichols at the bottom. And what you'll see on this chart of red dots is you have, Senator Brian Hughes, who's pretty considerably to the right of most of his colleagues, and then you have a lot of the Senate that are largely together, but you can see there are gradations of ones that are more often voting against bad policy and more often voting with Democrats. Ultimately, that's kind of how this system works with ranking. And at the very bottom, very obviously to the left of the rest of the pack, is Senator Robert Nichols. He is the lone remaining true liberal Republican. That's my opinion. That's how I would describe him. And it's not to say that there is no distinction between some of the other senators towards the bottom of that chart and some of the senators at the top. There is a distinction. But I think Nichols would be one of the last remaining individuals that you would say is emblematic of this truly liberal Republican faction that used to also be represented by Bob Deuel, Kel Seliger, John Corona, a number of senators that just were much more moderate to liberal. So Robert Nichols was in that group, always on the more liberal side, and he got even more liberal as the Senate got more conservative. So his retirement is welcome news to Republicans. Senator Nichols has been openly, vocally in opposition to many different Republican policies throughout his time. I cannot tell you how many policies die because Senator Nichols won't support it, and he's keeping it stuck in this committee. You also have a problem with him leading the fight to significantly weaken the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying last session. Now, he did convince Senator Kelly Hancock and a number of other senators to join him in that fight, and if they had not joined him, he would not have been able to be successful in his attempt to water down that bill. But Senator Robert Nichols, when he jumped in to that fight, just reminded everybody how much he consistently works against conservative policy. There are two individuals running to replace him, State Representative Trent Ashby and SREC member Rhonda Ward. I know both of them. I know both of them. I have watched both of their careers in the Republican Party and in the legislature. And I will tell you, my personal opinion right now is that both of them are to the right of Senator Robert Nichols. And that is good news. Because Senator Robert Nichols is a total F in almost every category of conservative policy. And State Representative Trent Ashby and SREC member Rhonda Ward are both to the right of Robert Nichols. Whatever happens in that election will be an upgrade for people who are wanting more Republican policy. Now, as a disclaimer, there are a handful of concerns that different people have about each of those individuals. And I will, some of y'all don't know this, but some people are concerned because Trent Ashby has never been one of your 25 most conservative legislators. He's not considered on, the conservative fighter wing of the GOP in the Texas House. But he should get credit for being probably the nail in the coffin that took out Speaker Dade Phelan when he came out and said the Texas House needs to change. And he backed the Republican caucus nominee, the eventual nominee, which was David Cook at the time. We'll talk about him in just a minute. Trent Ashby backed David Cook. He voted for David Cook in the caucus. When a deal was cut with Democrats, Trent Ashby stuck with the Republican caucus all the way to the floor and gave a speech for David Cook. So for Republicans who are saying we want Republican lawmakers who are generally siding with the bulk of the Republican caucus, Trent Ashby has shown more than once his willingness to do that. He did fight against Senator Lois Kolkhorst's Make America Healthy Again and Representative Lacey Hull's Make America Healthy Again bill. There were some people very frustrated with that. I was frustrated with that. So there are good things Representative Ashby has done. There are not great things he has done as well. But it is worth acknowledging that he is to the right of Robert Nichols. Rhonda Ward is another example of somebody who, as an SREC member, has consistently stood up for a lot of GOP policy, has consistently supported much of the Republican priorities and the Republican platform. One concern that people have, and it's a rightful concern, is that she backed Dana Myers for Texas GOP chair. And remember, Dana Myers was the Associated Republicans of Texas, Texans for Lawsuit Reform backed candidate who actually challenged Matt Rinaldi. She ran saying, I don't like that Matt Rinaldi is doing all these conservative things. I want to move the party back to the middle. And remember how I'm talking about this? We don't want to move the Senate back to the middle. We don't want to move the House back to the middle. We don't want to move the GOP back to the middle. And Rhonda Ward unfortunately backed Dana Myers in that election. And so that is my concern. Now, again, Rhonda Ward has consistently pushed a lot of conservative things. She's voted on some great resolutions on the SREC. She has, worked well with Abraham George, even though she did work during the convention for a more moderate kind of ART-TLR aligned candidate. So that's not to say anything disparaging Rhonda Ward. I will say that if you are a Republican in that district, and you are backing either of these individuals, you are working to move your Senate district to the right. So I like Rhonda Ward. I like Trent Ashby. This is not disparaging against either of them. I will say that either of them move that Senate district to the right. So that is just a good, positive thing for the state of Texas and where we are trying to move the state.
Real Texan.
I hope you'll sit down with Texas Scorecard every Sunday as we visit with real Texans who are doing real things to make the Lone Star State shine even brighter. We're going to be talking to activists and politicians, but we're also going to be talking with men and women who are shaping business in Texas and driving for a better culture.
Just a couple days ago, State Senator Brian Birdwell announced that he would not seek re-election as well. And I want to say two things about Senator Birdwell. One is that Senator Birdwell has been, in my opinion, in many ways, a pretty incredible public servant throughout his life. Some of y'all know this, many of y'all know this, but Senator Brian Birdwell was serving in the Pentagon on 9/11. And when the plane crashed into the Pentagon, Senator Brian Birdwell was engulfed in flames and was heavily burned throughout his entire body and has a tremendous testimony of his walk to recovery. He's a resilient individual. If you have ever watched any of the I Am Second videos, it is a Christian series of testimonials that are very powerful that talk about the grace and mercy of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and how he gives people the strength to persevere who are leaning on him in the midst of trials, adversities, and difficult aspects of their life. And Senator Brian Birdwell has an excellent video that I would recommend all of you. Just go to YouTube, type in I Am Second Brian Birdwell and watch that. If you want to know about the history of service of Senator Brian Birdwell in his life, that is what you have to watch. And you will walk away from that saying, I am glad that he was serving us in the legislature, because even though I have disagreed with Senator Birdwell at different times on policy, I have a hard time ever saying that he does not have a heart to serve people, whether it be in the military or in his time in the Senate. I think he has always stood up for what he does believe is right. Now, Senator Birdwell, in that Rice University ranking, was ranked as the third most liberal Republican senator. Okay. Now, again, the Senate passes a lot more conservative policy than the House. So being if you're the most liberal Republican, but Republicans in the Senate are advancing a lot of policy, Senator Birdwell still advanced a ton of conservative policy and voted for a lot of that conservative policy. So this is not calling him a liberal. I actually don't believe he's liberal on a personal level. But I will say that Senator Birdwell was not supportive of immigration policy that was going to allow Texas to stand up and enforce immigration laws when Joe Biden was president. Some of that might be his military background or just the way he views the world, that if the federal government doesn't want to secure the border, Senator Birdwell really did not seem to believe, in fact, seemed to fight against Texas trying to step in and secure that border. And I'm just telling you my opinion from having watched the discussion and debate on the Senate floor. He was very critical of immigration policy that was going to give Texas the ability to secure our border. Now, under the Trump administration, that doesn't matter as much because the Trump administration is securing the border. But if 3 years from now, we have a Democrat in the White House, you're going to want to have senators that are willing to step up and plug the gap that the federal government is going to open up, right? So Senator Birdwell being replaced with a more conservative person would be a huge benefit. And State Representative David Cook has already announced he's running to replace Senator Birdwell. He has been endorsed by David Spiller. He's been endorsed by Tony Tinderholt. He's been endorsed by Judge Tim O'Hare, the most conservative county judge in Texas. Tony Tinderholt, one of the 5 most conservative state representatives in Texas. And David Cook on the Rice University ranking that came out, I believe was in the top 3rd. So I want you to recognize this. David Cook is in the 3rd most conservative block of the Texas House Republican caucus of the 88. He's in the top 3rd. And Senator Birdwell is in the bottom 3 of 20 senators. So you can see how having State Representative David Cook replace Senator Brian Birdwell would move the Republican caucus in the Senate to the right. Okay? That is not meant as some massive criticism of Senator Birdwell, but it is meant to fully recognize the reality that David Cook over Brian Birdwell would be a conservative move to the right in the Texas Senate. Right now, David Cook is unopposed. Just another example of how Texas seems to be poised to have a Texas Senate that is more conservative than the previous Senate. And then Senator Kelly Hancock was chosen by Glenn Hager and Governor Abbott to replace Glenn Hager. He was hired by Comptroller Hager and is now the acting comptroller. He has decided to run for re-election with the backing of Governor Abbott, and Lee Wamsgans is running to replace him. Now, I've known Lee for quite some time. Many of you know Lee. She has the backing of State Representative Nate Schatzline, Judge Tim O'Hare, and many other conservatives in Tarrant County. She works with Patriot Mobile. She has been a grassroots conservative activist who has helped flip school boards to being conservative governed up there in Northeast Tarrant County, and is just a force for good in so many different areas and arenas. So Lee is somebody who has consistently been there and will definitely fight hard for all of our conservative priorities. Kelly Hancock is somebody who voted with Senator Robert Nichols to water down taxpayer-funded lobbying ban, and also he and Senator Nichols are the 2 Republicans that voted to impeach or convict Attorney General Ken Paxton. They wanted to remove your voice as voters who elected Ken Paxton. They wanted their own voice and their own desire to remove him, and that of Texans for Lawsuit Reform and other groups like that were putting a lot of pressure on them to vote to remove Ken Paxton from office, and they did that. So you can see how when Lee Wamsgans was literally organizing people across the state to fight for the voice of the people and defend Ken Paxton during his impeachment trial, and Kelly Hancock is trying to get senators to vote to convict him and kick him out of office, there's a pretty stark contrast between those 2 individuals. There's no doubt that Lee, if she was a state senator, would move SD9 to the right. So each and every one of these races that seems to be opening up seems to be a great opportunity for the Senate to get even more conservative, which should broaden the path to conservative policy. And when I think of what that looks like what does it look like to move things to the right? One of the things would be in-state tuition. I talked about this on the good, the bad, and the ugly of the legislative session, that one of the ugly parts was the fact that we couldn't even pass an in-state tuition ban in the Senate or the House last session. They were both stuck. And one of the letters that came out just yesterday, actually, and just since we're talking about these different people running, State Representative Trent Ashby and State Representative David Cook both signed on to this letter. Mike Alcott sent a letter to the various chancellors of the university systems. And I'm going to read this so you understand the importance. Now, to remind you, what essentially happened is they killed a ban on in-state tuition, but then President Donald Trump sued the state of Texas and said, y'all should not provide in-state tuition to illegals. And Ken Paxton, our attorney general, settled and agreed with Trump, and they reached a settlement which has Texas ending in-state tuition in the state of Texas. Governor Abbott is supportive of that as well. So Governor Abbott, Ken Paxton, Donald Trump end in-state tuition even without legislative approval. I want you to recognize that we had Republicans in the legislature in both chambers that wanted to keep using taxpayer dollars to pay for discounted college to those here illegally, while we have a governor, an attorney general, and a president who are willing to recognize that this law is unconstitutional and should go away. That's just, if you want to know, just one little window of an example of why we need to keep moving the legislature to the right. That is a perfect example. This letter, which was headed up by Representative Mike Alcott, is to Chancellor Zerwas in the University of Texas system. Okay, and I'm going to read this. Chancellor Zerwas, as you are aware, the state of Texas recently filed a joint motion with the federal government in which the state conceded that Texas Education Code, and it gives the code that gives illegals in-state tuition, as applied to aliens unlawfully present in the United States, violate the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Immediately thereafter, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas issued a permanent injunction prohibiting the enforcement of these provisions. In plain terms, Texas colleges and universities are now legally barred from awarding any educational benefits based on residency, including but not limited to in-state tuition rates and state financial aid, if such benefits are not equally available to all U.S. citizens. Because here's what they were saying. Well, you get this discount, but the American citizen in Oklahoma, if he's going to the University of North Texas, we charge him a premium. But if an illegal immigrant from anywhere in Texas comes to Denton, he gets a discount, right? Let's continue back to the letter. We are aware that many institutions award non-resident tuition waivers through need-based or merit-based scholarships. Since these tuition waivers are also available to United States citizens from other states, we do not believe they would violate the Illegal Immigration Reform Immigrant Responsibility Act, IIRIRA, or the terms of the consent judgment. However, we highly discourage you from exploiting this provision to grant blanket resident tuition rates to illegal aliens enrolled in institutions of the University of Texas system. The intent and letter of federal law is unambiguous. Taxpayer-funded benefits must not favor individuals in the United States illegally over American citizens. Should any institution attempt to circumvent this requirement, you risk exposing your institution and yourselves personally to legal liability. Accordingly, we are requesting the following. So this is what the letter requests. Immediate cessation of any policy or practice that awards resident tuition rates or state-funded financial aid based on the Texas applicant for state financial aid, or any other residency-based standard that may include or benefit illegal aliens. I know this is kind of wordy and policy wonky, but bear with me because this is really important. Number 2, this is what they're requesting. Written confirmation to our offices that your institution has reviewed and updated its policies to comply with the consent judgment and federal law. And number 3, a complete accounting of the number of students enrolled at your institution who are not lawfully present in the United States and the tuition classification and rates applied to those individuals. The TAFSFA program, by its own definition, is targeted at individuals who are ineligible for federal aid due to their unlawful presence in the United States. As such, it falls squarely within the category of prohibited benefits under the IIRIRA, and the federal injunction now binding upon the state of Texas and its institutions of higher education. We trust your institution will act promptly to comply with the law. Failure to do so will invite scrutiny, legal consequences, and legislative review. Sincerely, Mike Alcott. And the other legislators that joined Mike were as Representative Andy Hopper, Alan Schoolcraft, Katrina Pearson, Tony Tinderholt, Brent Money, Carissa Richardson, Mark LaHood, Mitch Little, Helen Kerwin, Rep. Wes Friedel, Briscoe Kane, Trent Ashby, David Cook, Valerie Swanson, Matt Morgan, Shelley Luther, Nate Schatzline, Tom Oliverson, Richard Hayes, Joanne Schaffner, J.M. Lozano, Ben Bumgardner, Hillary Hicklin, Steve Toth, David Lowe, A.J. Louderback, Janice Holt, Mark DeRazio, Caroline Harris Davila. So here's the long and short of this letter. This letter says, hey, we've agreed that illegal immigrants aren't going to get in-state tuition, but there are some kind of crafty ways that you as a university could say, let's just make sure that all the illegals that go to college don't have their tuition go up. And the point of this ruling being celebrated is that we don't want to have institutions, public institutions, taxpayer-funded institutions that are getting more taxpayer money today than they were getting last year. Go, hey, we can kind of fudge some numbers and figure out how these illegals can still pay discounted college tuition rates. Absolutely not. And Representative Mike Alcott, who's one of the leading voices on immigration in the state of Texas, is making sure to hold these universities accountable and make it public that we're watching you. And if you try to work around this, we will hold you accountable. This is just one example. A lot of the people on that letter are people that came in last election cycle. And recently, State Representative Drew Darby, who's one of the most liberal Republicans in the Texas House, was bemoaning the presence of all these legislators. Let's go to this clip.
I think one calculation was that we lost over 157 years of service in the Texas legislature. That's one impact. And we elected folks who, in some cases, were elected because the incumbent was denigrated to a level that nobody wanted to vote for the incumbent. They perhaps were not elected with their own vision, their own background, their own unique skill sets that would lead to success in the process. So we had 30-something new members. That's a learning process. As with most things, I think there are some really strong folks in there that have a very bright future in the process, and then there's some that I think may be disillusioned that they weren't able to be as effective as they thought they would be or get things done. And so they may not have as robust an appetite, if you will, to come back.
I love how Drew Darby is like trying to, manifest into existence at the end of that clip. Like, maybe some of them won't want to come back. Maybe they just realize like they shouldn't be here. And while that's a valiant effort, these legislators continue to announce their reelection campaigns, and conservatives are excited to see the return of these conservative legislators to the Texas House of Representatives, because we know that their presence is what did deliver more conservative policy wins this session than last session, the session before, and the session before, probably combined. So huge opportunity moving forward as long as these guys come back and continue to fight, as long as the legislature moves to the right, and there are opportunities to do that. And so you can see Representative Drew Darby he can't stand the fact that these guys are here. And it's so much easier to just say they don't have any of their own ideas, they don't really bring anything to this body, than to have to contend with the distinctions of the policy disagreements you have. Representative Darby has pushed a lot of policy. He debated Mike Alcott last session on a guest worker program. He wanted a guest worker program to bring more individuals who live in other countries and are not citizens into Texas to take jobs from Texas citizens with an expanded guest worker state-based program. It was crazy. And he debated Mike Alcott on that, saying, hey, we need more foreign workers in our workforce at a time when wages are being suppressed and people have a hard time not even being able to afford to buy a house. A working class family can't even buy a house sometimes. So it is just a good, helpful, encouraging reminder that some of the more liberal individuals in our party are very frustrated with the wins that you are delivering for the people of Texas, that you have delivered by electing these individuals, by campaigning for them, by supporting conservative organizations, by being loud and proud and trying to fight to advance conservative policy, by fighting to elect strong leadership at the GOP with Chairman Abraham George over Vice Chair Dana Myers, who was literally primaried Matt Rinaldi because she didn't like how the party was moving to the right. She was trying to bring it back to the middle, was unsuccessful, right? So these are just a few examples of the victories you've given that the more liberal factions in our party are very upset about. And you should pat yourself on the back. There's a lot of things happening, but those are just a handful of updates. I hope you have a great week. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Texas Scorecard is the place to learn about Texas politics. Be sure to click the bell, like this video, and subscribe if you believe in citizen-driven journalism. You can also go to TexasScorecard.com to read all things about Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.